just to reiterate what I had said already, what we're going to do is just Randeep is going to take Gregg through just kind of a few prepared questions at first, just some things we think that the majority of the audience may want to know about and give you some more background about Gregg. And then we're hoping that you guys are not a shy bunch and that you will drop your questions into the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. So that's kind of how we're planning to do this. So I guess with that being said, Gregg, as you know, I'd love for you to just give at least a brief introduction on yourself, who you are, where you're from, where you went to school, maybe a little bit about your early to mid-career background, and then kind of touch a little bit upon, your journey from Salesforce ultimately to Invoca. Now that's a lot of things, so take however much time you need to cover that.
Good. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. I really enjoy engaging and interacting with students and recent alums. Kind of helps keep my mind fresh about all the things I've forgotten since I was in business school and graduate school, gosh, over 15 years ago. So Gregg Johnson, I live out in the Bay Area, have been out mostly on the West Coast for the past 25 or 30 years. Did my undergraduate degree in international relations at Stanford. Thought I was going to go be an academic and maybe work at the State Department one day, and sort of stumbled into the world of technology in the late 90s. And then went and got a master's degree in international relations along with an MBA from Wharton, and then came back and did a couple of years of consulting work at BCG, largely with technology companies, and then spent almost a decade in mostly product management and also product marketing roles at Salesforce before leaving Salesforce in 2016 to come and join Invoca. Invoca's a company focused on conversation intelligence for sales and marketing. So we largely serve big, well-known B2C brands, companies that you see advertise on the weekends, and help them drive more effective digital marketing and sales. And the company was about 20 million in revenue, about 115, 120 employees when I joined. We're now about 325 employees. We'll hit 100 million in recurring revenue this year. And so for me, it's been a long, fun and exciting journey around being a CEO, and just happy to share any perspectives on what's going on in the world of technology. Let me close my Slack real quick so I won't get bombarded with messages. Happy to talk about technology, careers, post-MBA, sales and marketing software, AI, anything as we go through.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So yeah, Randeep, why don't you kick it off with just a few questions that you wanted to cover, just to get some conversation going and some hot topics that I know we wanted to address. And then again, for everybody who just joined recently, please feel free to start putting your questions in the chat. And then after we're done with the prepared questions, we'll start answering some of yours. So I hope you guys won't be shy. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Marcy. Hi, everyone. I'm Randeep Mitra, founder of Sociate. .io, the platform that bringing you this Q&A event today. So again, super excited to have Gregg here with us. Been kind of waiting for this event for a few weeks now. So Gregg, how about we go back to 2016, right? You were at Salesforce, extremely big organization, even at that point, and even bigger now. You had been in a senior leadership role for 9 years, if I'm getting that math right. Can you walk us through what were the kind of the key drivers and kind of your thought process, and also how the opportunity came about to you from Invoca, and kind of help us kind of think about that particular time point?
Yeah, and Randeep, I'll go farther back than that. I think I'll start in my time at Salesforce. So I joined Salesforce in 2007. Salesforce went public in 2004. And when I joined Salesforce, it was about 1,500 people in 2007. And when I left in 2016, it was about 25 to 30,000. It's probably about 50,000 now. So it was a tremendous amount of change over that period of time. The interesting thing for me in my time at the company, it's a great company. It's an amazing company to work at. I feel like in a way I got a second MBA with a specialization in technology during my time at Salesforce. And but one of the things that I very deliberately did in my time there is I always worked on new and emerging products. I've always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit in sort of my blood, what I enjoy doing. So a couple of years after undergrad, I worked in management consulting, my first job out of undergrad, and I left in 1999 to go start a company with 3 people that I worked with. So from 1999 through my time at Wharton, summer internships, I'd done a lot of work with really small companies, and I sort of enjoyed it. I enjoyed having that impact. And so in my time at Salesforce, I always gravitated and worked on new and emerging products rather than like the core product. So at Salesforce, the first core product was called Sales Cloud. The company has grown and evolved where the second core product. It's now actually the biggest revenue driver is a customer service application called Service Cloud. I always avoided working on those products because those were sort of the big behemoths where your role shrank and became very narrow. The good news is you had lots of the organization behind you helping you do things, but your job got very narrow. And so I always really enjoyed working on new products, things that were emerging, things that did not yet have scale inside Salesforce. And so that really was first manifested. We bought a company about 6 or 8 weeks after I joined Salesforce in the collaboration space. It was a team of 10 people. So I worked with that team for about a year and a half. That then kind of evolved. This was around the time, I'm going to date myself, that Facebook and Twitter were really taking off, like 2008, 2009, 2010. We put a ton of investment around building a collaboration social network product inside of Salesforce, kind of a predecessor to Slack. That was a huge thing. Sort of we went from 4 or 5 developers to like 75 developers in 6 months. And so I did that for a few years. And then as Salesforce started to make its first acquisitions at scale in the digital marketing space, I went over to go to work in that space. So the story behind that, the common theme is I always wanted to work on new and emerging things because I enjoyed kind of discovering new things. I enjoyed being more exposed to the full part of the business. In my last role at Salesforce, I owned product and a product marketing team. And then I wasn't responsible for sales, but there was a sales leader who carried a sales number for selling only the product I worked on. So he and I were joined at the hip. I was not successful if he wasn't successful. He wasn't successful if I wasn't successful. And what had happened is by 2016, Salesforce had gotten to be really big. At Salesforce size now, and you see this in big software companies, like revenue streams and businesses don't matter unless they're like 200, 300, 400, $500 million. Like you just got to be really big to be relevant at a company that size. And so I started thinking about leaving. I wanted to go to do something smaller. And I've always enjoyed the idea of being a CEO and have the intellectual exposure to all parts of the business. Like one of the things I love about my day is on any given day, like I started off today at a meeting with somebody to talk about like updating our COVID vaccine approach and what we're doing around the new variant. I had a discussion around some of the work that we do with Google that's a partner. I had a meeting with somebody that we're looking at hiring as executive. I had a meeting talking about product roadmap. And so I was really interested to sort of get into a business, not one starting from scratch, because I felt like that was like a little bit too raw for me, but one that sort of achieved product market fit and was looking to scale. So for me, learning and sort of constantly challenging my mind was a big motivator. And so Randeep, as I thought about leaving, the idea of being a CEO, on one hand was a dramatic change because I had not done that role before, but in a way I would say it was a continuity in my path of always trying to work on new things and building things that were relatively small, even inside of a big company like Salesforce.
That's a very insightful, right, way of thinking about it, right? The bigger companies you started in Salesforce, you were not in those products, right, where the core products more of kind of the entrepreneurial side of Salesforce, or maybe right the kind of the emerging side of Salesforce, if I got that right. So Gregg, if you can take that kind of that point in time, but now a lot of our MBA members might be thinking, right, big tech versus startup, right, where to join, right? So I know it's a similar question, but like, what would be the things they should be looking out, right, as they're thinking about, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 things to evaluate big tech, versus startups, even big bank versus fintechs, right?
Yeah. I think the answer is 100% dependent on your background. So let me take myself, for example. When I came to get my MBA, I worked in technology before I came and got my MBA. I worked in technology while I got my MBA, and I worked in technology after I got my MBA. And so for me, I think there were a lot more variety of paths that I could go down. I think if you're somebody who doesn't have a background in technology and is interested in technology, The challenge you have when you go to relatively small companies is small companies are typically looking for specific skill sets, specific experiences, and they're less willing to make the bet on raw intellectual horsepower and passion and hard work. I think that's short-sighted. Like, one of the things I really try to pride myself on is looking beyond, like, what is it that a person just did in their last job or two? How do I think more broadly about their skill set? But I think larger tech companies are amazing places to go if you're just doing that career transition into tech and you did something before getting your MBA. Because number one, they've got the infrastructure. Number two, oftentimes the job that you enter into tech or any industry in, that may not be the job you ultimately find you want, right? And like your ability to go into a company, kind of prove yourself, learn the business, and then maybe you come out and you work in like marketing, but you're like, you know what, I don't really like marketing. Like, I'm gonna go work in product, or I want to go work in customer success, or I want to go do sales. And big companies just tend to have a lot more of that variety to offer you. And so I think if you don't have tech background, a lot of the mid to large size tech companies today are great training grounds that train you to be a good athlete in tech, and then you can go do other things. If you come from a background where you have a lot of tech and you've sort of accentuated or rounded out your skill set with a graduate degree or an MBA, then I think it's much easier for you to go and say, what do I want to go do? And I can go small, I can go mid-size, I can go big. One of the things I say to a lot of people when they're thinking about making career switches is, if you think about, like, there's what industry have you been in, and there's what function have you been in. And you get your best career leverage when you change one of those two things, but not two of those two things at the time. So like for me, when I left Salesforce, I changed my function and going from being a product leader to a C-level executive leader, but I stayed in the industry. I stayed in software, and I stayed in an area of software that I knew well. If I had gone from marketing and CRM software to go work in HR software, which I don't know anything about, there's no way I would have become a CEO. Now, having been a CEO for 4 or 5 years and sort of established my domain knowledge there, I could go work at a HR software company if I wanted to. But I always tend to think about, if you want to get your most career leverage, try to change one thing at a time in each step of your journey. You can try 2 steps, and sometimes that may be the right thing to do if you find something that you're really passionate about. But when you change 2 steps at a time, you're probably going to be making more of a lateral move, or maybe even a slightly back step move. Whereas when you change one thing at a time, you tend to always be moving forward. But that being said, like, one of my big beliefs, I say this to a lot of our younger employees all the time, the most important thing for you, especially coming out of undergrad, a little bit less so coming out of an MBA graduate program, is to find things that you're passionate about, that you're going to be exciting working about for the next 20 years. I consider myself really lucky, because when I graduated from Stanford, even though the internet was being discovered and built all around me, I had no idea. I luckily stumbled into the world of software, which I really enjoy and I really like. I found something I was passionate about, and that what kind of gets me up in the morning and keeps me going every day. And I think that's a lot more important than optimizing for the one little incremental next step in your career. Like, optimize for the next 10 to 15 years of your career. Don't optimize for the next 12, 15 months.
So that's a great advice, right, Marcy? Like, don't change 2 variables at the same time. I guess just change one career variable. That's a great advice. So now you have been at Invoca for running Invoca for like last 5 years, right, Gregg? So you guys are the leader in conversational AI. So could you like walk us through kind of the typical use cases that you're solving for your clients, right? And kind of the maybe 1 or 2 biggest kind of the wins you guys had in terms of like really unlocking new opportunities for you.
Yeah. So we serve generally big B2C brands. So think of it like, if any of you bought a car recently, you might have gone to a place like AutoNation, or to get new wireless phone from like a Verizon or an AT&T. And we tend to focus on industries where there's a relatively complex product or service. So if you think about like getting a mortgage, if any of you have ever bought a house or refinanced, getting auto insurance or life insurance, investments, these are not products that you just buy on your phone and decide you don't like and then send back the next day, like we do with Amazon, right? Like when I see a sweater I like, oh, I'll buy 3 of those, like 2 different colors, and just drop it off at UPS. I don't like. So in these more complex industries, technically we call them considered purchase industries. Typically these are areas where you want to get advice as part of the buying process. So like when I bought my first condo in San Francisco, and my wife and I had just been married for 2 years. I was a BCG Wharton MBA, so like I could do math on getting, like comparing a 30-year mortgage or a 10-year mortgage and the interest rates and all those things. But like I wanted to be confident I was making the right buying decision. I wanted to be confident that the mortgage that I was getting was going to close by the time my house closed, so I could actually get the house and not lose it and lose the house of our dreams. And so what we see a lot in these industries is, if you think about the journey a buyer goes through, I'd go out and I'd search on mortgage and I'd land on a bank's website and I'd do a bunch of research and maybe I start applying, but at some point in the process of buying that good or service, I want to talk to a human being and I want to feel good about the decision that I'm making and I want to ask some questions. And so what our technology does is we sort of enable a bank or a telecom company or an insurance company or somebody like AutoNation to track that journey of going from a Facebook or a Google to your website, which is run on Adobe, to doing some research, to then having a conversation with a product expert and understanding if you bought or not. And we use technology to help that brand make that whole experience better for you as a consumer and more efficient for them in terms of how they drive revenue. So it's things like understanding which Google and Facebook campaigns end up driving sales. When that sale doesn't happen through Amazon, that sales happens in a human-to-human conversation. That's using AI to mine that human-to-human conversation and understand, did that mortgage associate do the right things and give me the right type of advice? Were they in adherence with their compliance requirements? Do they deliver a good experience? And using AI to help make those human-to-human touch points work really, really well. And so those are the different ways that we go help largely revenue-producing teams at some of these big B2C brands that you see often in as you're perusing the internet or you're perusing what you're doing in TV.
That's great. So I'm just kind of sub question within that question. Is there like a B2C or is it like B2B industries can also use your software right now, or is it mostly B2C?
The technology behind our software is equally, I would say, relevant in B2C. Kind of the core nuggets of it are equally relevant, B2B versus B2C. But what you often see in software industries is you tend to see focus on one or the other, either for go-to-market reasons and just being efficient about who you're talking to, about integration reasons. And so like a lot of the technology stack is different in B2B versus B2C. The example I always use to use, because people understand it, in the technology world, there's email marketing, right? Like if you don't know technology, you're like, email marketing, let me guess. So you munge a bunch of data, you send a bunch of email, and you report on it. Like that seems pretty basic. B2B, B2C, it's all the same thing. If you look at the market of email marketing, which is pretty mature, there were 3 very distinct winners in B2C. There were 3 completely different winners in B2B. And those winners were different enough that the big 3 software companies, Oracle, Adobe, and Salesforce, they each bought one company out of each of those 2 groups. So like they double bought in those whole categories. So you tend to see as software categories mature, more like levels of specialization. So in our world, we tend to focus more on B2C companies that are selling to consumers like us versus B2B companies that are selling to other businesses with more complex sales cycles.
Got it. So whenever I think of B2C, the first thing that comes to mind these days with all the changes happening is privacy concerns, consumer privacy, the landscape, especially the digital marketing side of it. There is obviously GDPR, there is regulations, there's big tech changing, Google changes, Apple. Could you just talk about like what are the privacy concerns in your conversational AI that you might have to be dealing with? And also how do you navigate this scaling it in different markets, international regulations?
Yeah. So if any of you are close to the marketing and ad tech world as Randeep is, there's been a lot of shift in this space over the past 2 or 3 years, because what used to happen and used to be common is like, let's say I'm in the market to buy a new car and I would go out to some, third-party site like Car and Driver magazine, and I do some research on a car. And then Car and Driver would then go sell that data to, like I have a Jeep. So like they'd sell it to Jeep and they'd be like, well, we got a audience of 500,000 people looking at Jeeps on our website. Suddenly Jeep would start advertising to me. Jeep has no relationship with me. I haven't been to Jeep's website. I haven't done anything with Jeep. It's like having a stranger come knock on your door. And there's been a lot of pushback against that. And there's been a lot of focus on what's called first-party data, which is this idea that a company interacts with you as an individual consumer without any intermediaries. So what Jeep's gotten more focused on is when a consumer like Gregg comes to the Jeep website and is looking for a Jeep product, how do they do a better job of that one-to-one relationship between Jeep and Gregg as a consumer? And how do I build upon that, as opposed to getting data about people that have no relationship with me? And I'm like, who is this brand and what are they doing with me? So at Invoca, we're really fortunate in that this hasn't impacted our business that much, because we sit at a point in the customer journey where a customer is typically coming to a brand, like I'm coming to the website or I'm engaging with a brand, and then I'm actually reaching out to the brand to say, I want to learn more about what you're doing. And so it's a very, what we think of as a very high opt-in point in the consumer buying process. And so for us, it's actually helped our business, because there's been more focus on, a company like Jeep needs to do a better job of collecting and using all the data of the interactions that they have directly with consumers. And, you'd be amazed. People do all sorts of crazy gymnastics to understand what consumers are trying to do based off of website behavior and what pages they're looking at. And you think about in these industries, like I'm having a conversation with you telling you exactly what product I want to buy. Like I use this example all the time. If you call T-Mobile or Verizon and AT&T, you might be saying to them like, hey, the new iPhones come out in September. I'm debating, like, should I get a new iPhone? If I get a new iPhone, do I get the upgrade? Go back to their website. They're trying to figure out if you like Androids or you like iPhones based on your web behavior. You just told them you like iPhones, right? So it's like super useful data. Now, there are a lot of concerns around the privacy of the data that is captured in that human-to-human conversation. And so we'll do things. We have technology like, so when a consumer is talking to an agent at one of our customers, they'll hear the message like, this call may be recorded for quality control purposes, et cetera, et cetera. The call gets recorded. It gets transcribed into text in real time. We'll differentiate within the text, what did the agent say? What did the consumer say? But then we'll do things like if somebody provides their credit card number for a purchase, like we'll redact that in the transcription. The call is recorded. When somebody goes back to play that call, you would hear me saying, oh, Randeep, what's your credit card number? And you hear Randeep go, it is. And then it goes beep until Randeep's done. And so there's a lot of work, because we do a lot of work in healthcare and a lot of work in financial services. There's a lot of work around keeping that data secure and private. And because we don't really work with SMBs, we more work with big enterprises, like we've had to invest a lot from a technology perspective to make sure that we're compliant and doing all the right things that like the biggest banks and the biggest healthcare organizations in the country are focused on.
And just to on that question, how about international markets, Gregg? Do you actually have to, like, how much do you operate outside of US right now, and what are the?
We're relatively light. I would say we're actually an exception. If you look at most software companies our size, I would say most of them probably have 10 to 15% of their revenue, maybe sometimes 20 or 30 from overseas. Ours is probably like 1%. And so I'd say that's, in ways, that's a function of our business. So if you think about it, most of the industries that we serve are heavily regulated. So think about mortgage lending, right? Like mortgage lending is very heavily regulated. The number 1, number 2, and number 3 players in the US in mortgage lending are not even in the top 30 mortgage lenders in the UK, much less France or Germany. So in a lot of our regulated markets like telecom, healthcare, obviously very different approaches to healthcare, financial services and others, there's less customer pull for us to move across markets than you would have in some other industries like travel and hospitality. You do if you've got a great travel and hospitality customer who becomes a customer in the US, they very quickly are going to want to use you in Europe and Asia and other places. So we've done work around things like GDPR because we have enough exposure that we want to make sure that our customers feel comfortable using our product. But we haven't been as global of a business as most companies you'd expect of our size, which is a bummer for me because I love to travel and I miss traveling. We were about to open a UK office before COVID hit 2 years ago. But we've had to, I would say, deal with some of those complexities, but not the full degree of those complexities for a more globalized oriented business.
Got it. Makes sense. So the last question I wanted to ask before I open this up to other questions, and I see people are trickling in and adding new questions. So what are, like, even if you broaden it up, Greg, outside of conversational AI, right? From your perspective, if you were at Salesforce or even now, what are those like 2-3 industries that our members here, like if they're looking for industries that have the most impact in the next 5 years in terms of AI in marketing, in sales, and it's kind of underserved or underutilizing AI? Where do you think those big opportunities are, those verticals?
I mean, I think in a way, I'll tell you now, I think AI is part of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the analogy I would use, I'm going to go back to my phone for a second. So like I was at Salesforce in 2011, 2010, when just the adoption of the iPhone and Android devices just exploded. And the way that we thought about it is we created a distinct product team to focus on building applications for the iPhone and for Android devices. And over time, what you realized is that like every product needs that, right? Like mobile is not its own thing. Mobile is part of everything. And you see this maturity in technology cycles where something new comes and you sort of want to specialize around it and put dedicated focus on it and have a specific group of people do it. But then your problem becomes like, I need this to be in the DNA of my entire organization. And then what we did is we ended up sort of taking that mobile team and blowing it up and putting in a bunch of other products teams so that every product team became mobile capable. I would say AI is going through the same thing. Like 3 or 4 years ago, you would look at AI and be like, oh, there's some specialists in AI. AI is becoming like a horizontal layer of software, right? Like every software application is using AI to make better sense of patterns and data, to give users better ideas of when things are changing that are important to them. They're being used in a lot of different ways. So I would think like if you want to be a software professional in the next 5 to 10 years, you have to understand AI because AI is going to be core to what you do. Now, there are some businesses that are very, very focused, for example, on like AI infrastructure and sort of how do you build the tooling, and like the analogy we use in Silicon Valley a lot is, a lot of people lost a lot of money during the gold rush, but the people who made a lot of money were the people who sold picks and shovels to everybody who was out looking for gold. And in the same way in the AI world, there's like a lot of AI infrastructure and technology that you need at a core level to develop AI. And that's where you have AI specialization. But I almost tend to think of it as if you're going to be a software person with a career in the next 10 years in technology, you need to understand some of the basic core elements of AI and how it works and what's good about it and what's bad about it if you want to do any kind of software. So I feel like it's almost becoming critical in everything. Whereas it definitely had some early initial sort of applications, and especially in things that were related to unstructured data. So like us conversations, it doesn't fit neatly into rows and arrows, or things like people are doing really cool stuff where they look at photographic images of fields and they can understand the health of those fields. And so you've got people that do things like sell seed and agricultural products to farmers. They're now proactively coming to them and saying, oh, Randeep, like we did a scan and we saw that within your field, like this part over here looks like it's not doing so well. We'd recommend, this particular agricultural product to improve it. There are lots of interesting things that are done there, but I think it shows you how AI is kind of becoming part of all technology.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? I think it's so right now. It's like, I think you put it like the horizontal layer, right? From healthcare all the way, right, to fintech. I mean, it's kind of driving.
Yeah.
Some driving probably more than others, but that's a great point. So that kind of concludes. Marcy, you want to say something? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say exactly what you were about to say, that, we have a couple more questions we'll circle back to Gregg with later, but we would love to answer a couple of the questions that have been coming in on the chat, and please feel free to add more. Although how we typically like to do it is have you ask your own question in your own words. We don't need to read it for you. So Yasmin, if you want to just take the floor and ask Gregg your questions. Thank you for being the first brave soul to ask one.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Everything. First of all, I was actually going to ask about the career, career change and everything, but you answered that, and I think that really helped with kind of, not changing two things at once. So my other question actually was, I wanted to learn a little bit of the, what were some of the lessons that you took away from your MBA, and as you were going about your MBA, how did you recognize what you were passionate about?
Again, I think first of all, Yasmin, it's really nice to meet you, and I appreciate the question. I think everybody goes through their own journey, right? And for me, I just saw the contrast between my own path through graduate school and MBA, which was pretty linear, right? Like I worked in technology before, I worked in technology after, I worked in product marketing, product management before, I worked in product marketing. So like for a lot of people, I feel like MBAs are significant transition points where people change trajectory. It was not like that for me. And so I had a good idea. Like I studied entrepreneurial management when I was at Wharton. I knew I wanted to go back to a small company. I went back to BCG knowing I wasn't going to stay to be a lifelong consultant, that I was probably going to want to leave. It was even funny when I was being recruited by BCG. I remember asking them, like, can you tell me about people that have left BCG to go work at startups? Which it's not the best way to sell yourself if you're looking to sell yourself. But I think it's indicative I knew where I wanted to go long term. I knew I liked building things. Actually, I would say, I don't want to scare you all, my MBA really has helped me in the past 5 years. It did not help me a lot in my first 8 to 10 years after being at Wharton. And that's because when I was in my product management, product marketing roles, those were largely skills that I had before going to business school. Did business school help me with marketing frameworks and be a little bit smarter marketer? Yes. But where I would say I've actually really leaned into things that I uniquely learned in my experience at Wharton is actually since becoming a CEO, and is largely related to finance. My finance skills atrophied a decent bit in that decade because I just didn't use them very often. Like I didn't build models, I didn't look at models, I didn't think about those things very much. I wrote a lot, and I helped work on a lot of slide decks and visualizations, and so like that part of my consulting and MBA experience really helped. But now I find myself going back and thinking about frameworks around people, culture, teams, organizational development that I learned during my time at Wharton. I definitely leveraged the finance skills that I learned at Wharton. So I think what I would say is the investment you're making today is like, it's not a 5-year investment. It may seem like it. It's actually a 20 to 30-year investment. And it will give you foundations that you may not use right away, but you will probably, as you get to be more senior and the span of your role and your responsibility gets wider, it'll probably help you more, maybe down the road more so. But for me, because I wasn't a career switcher, I didn't come out of my MBA my first year or two being like, well, I'm so glad I did that. I could never be here if I hadn't done that. Like that kind of wasn't my path. But I think that really depends on your own unique path and where you come from in your background.
Good to hear. Thank you.
No problem. Good luck.
Thanks so much. So our next question comes from Minwoo, and I'll let you kind of paraphrase it and ask Gregg directly, but now we have a more AI specific question.
Oh, yes. So thank you for sharing your business, and it is really interesting to see the application of AI in some CRM space, especially for call audio-based ones. So I think it's very cool. But one of my questions is that when I worked in my previous startup, it was also kind of SaaS startup, and we mainly depended on some chat-based or email-based customer service to save the kind of human resources, because call is good. We always depends on kind of call-based service or sales, but at the same time, it requires a lot of resources. So we kind of wanted to use some chat-based interaction more. So in that, some change in the market, how do you see that you have to respond to that kind of movement? Yeah, because the product is very cool, but it is only focusing on the call at the moment. So I just want to know your kind of insight about your perspective on the market.
Minwoo, do you want to come do some product strategy work with us sometime?
No, but I was a product manager in my previous company and worked for some CRM companies, like marketing automation company. And I also kind of Salesforce, managed my Salesforce when I was in previous startups. So somehow familiar with this topic and interested in this topic too.
Yeah, good. It's a great question, one that's very relevant in the market today. Yeah, I would, my brief answer to your question is yes. My longer answer to your question is when I came to Invoca 5 years ago, what I was excited about in joining was the idea of applying AI to better understand conversational data. And call data is one form of conversational data. And so, yeah, a lot of, if you kind of dig down into the guts of some of how our technology works, the kind of application layer, the use cases we're focused on today are around calls. But part of what we've done to sort of stress test the core of our technology for the future is like, we'll run email, chat transcripts, Twitter streams through it. And part of what we do, what our technology does is we'll look for patterns in conversations and sort of identify patterns that are happening in increasing volume. We may not necessarily know what that pattern is or the significance of that pattern, but we know those conversations are alike. We know that they're getting more and more frequent in volume, and thus we think they may be relevant for your business. And so we say, hey, go look at these. And we've looked at applying that technology and how it performs not only against calls, but also against other forms of conversation. So yeah, the way that we think about kind of from a technology roadmap perspective is a broad range of conversation or interaction patterns. The way that I think about when I talk to like a marketing, sales, or revenue executive B2C company, the way that I think about the mission of our company is we want to help a brand find the right combination of digital touch points and human conversational touch points to drive the right customer experience. Conversational touch points, maybe messaging, maybe SMS, WhatsApp, different things like that. But the goal is to help the brand find the right way to engage with you as a consumer through a combination of digital, which is highly efficient, but also with human, which can be highly emotive and highly empathetic. And so totally agree with your line of thinking and definitely part of where we see technology going.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, because now I got to know that, because it will be scripted. So somehow there is a potential for you to expand your service to another areas like you mentioned. Yes, yeah. Thank you.
I would just add real quick, like one of the interesting things that you learn about in being a CEO is you're always trying to think of how do I manage the business to multiple time horizons? Like the way that I think about it, when I first got to the company, I sort of thought about my time allocation. How much am I spending on things that are impactful to the business this month? How much time am I spending on the business that are impactful this quarter? How much this year? How much of it 2 years from now? And when I first got to the company, because I'd never been a CEO, I had to spend a lot of time on this month and a lot of time on this quarter. But as you grow and as you learn, you start to think about not only your own time allocation, but also the company's time allocation. And so part of what we're constantly thinking about is what bets do we make that are paying off this year? What bets are we making that pay off a year or two down the road? Like getting into more product areas like you're talking about, Minwoo. And sometimes the organization resists that. The organization's like, I can't think about anything else. Like, when you're cramming for finals and, like your friend wants to go do something, you're like, I can't do anything else right now. Part of my job as a CEO is to figure out how much stress can the organization take in trying to do multiple things at once. And in the same way that like I'm not a workout person, but like when you work out, like you break down muscle to build muscle, right? And so like you have to think about how much can I push the organization to try to do more things, and when do I need to pull back? Like when is it showing stress, and when are we trying to do multiple things at once? But that's one of the challenges in being a CEO is you're constantly trying to, I ask my board members, like, am I not taking enough risk, or am I taking too much risk? And how do I set that level of risk deliberately? And sometimes that means taking more risk, but you're constantly trying to think about how you push the organization and interpreting the feedback signals you get from people.
Wonderful. And I know it's not in the chat, but we had somebody raise their hand, and I think your display name is not your actual name. So I won't read it out loud, but whoever raised their hand can go ahead and come off mute and ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Yi Shuang. So I have two questions and from Gregg, because I was very interested about your topic that you said you are going to talk about how you transfer from MBA to CEO. That's what I want to do in the future. Sure. And so I came from China, and I'm an MBA student in USC Marshall. So my question is that how should I leverage the resources from USC and also outside of the campus to build my career here in this totally new country. And so, the second question is, you talked about that some part of the knowledge, for example, financial accounting, you actually use it when you become a CEO. And now I have this question. I have this. So I don't have a financial background. I don't like that subjects, and usually I feel so. I don't enjoy the class anyways. And so, but I know one day I will probably have a chance to be a CEO because that's my destination for myself. So how should I spend the time on this course, and in order to not feel so regret that maybe many years later I will become a CEO that I didn't study hard in. So those are my two questions. So I really appreciate that I know you today. I really like your talk. I wish after this meeting I can also connect with you, and if we can find some chance, I want to consult something. Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem at all. I'm not going to be of much help on your first question because you are a far braver soul than I am. In terms of moving to an entirely new place and starting a career and all the different things they can use. I would say in general, I'm going to go back and repeat myself, like regardless, CEO is just a title. It's like a type of job. My biggest career advice to you all is like, find something that you love doing. Find something that you're really excited about, because if you find something that you're passionate about, you can do different roles, you can do different things, and like you're still going to be excited to get up in the morning and do your work. And so finding that passion, I think, is more important than anything else, because that's a 20-year discovery. That's not like a 3-year thing. I think to your specific question on accounting, I got to be honest with you, I didn't love accounting either.
Yeah.
And when you run a business, I'm going to apologize in advance to anybody who is an accounting specialist, is ex-Deloitte or anything like that. What I'm about to say, but like when you run a business, there are kind of two elements of finance. There's sort of the accounting part, which is looking at like, does everything iron out? Like, does everything mix and match? Do you spend the amount of money that you said you spent? Do you make the amount of money that you made you spend? I spent almost no time on that, because we have a really good finance team and we have an auditor, Deloitte, that I trust. And like, I know that we're solid there. The other part of it that I enjoy much more, because it's fun and intellectually I enjoy it, is thinking about like, what are the different ways that I can drive growth in the business? What are the things that I can do in terms of go-to-market or product investments? And how do those investments turn into returns over time? And that's the core of a CEO's job. That's the fun stuff to really think about. And that's kind of called more financial planning analysis, more FP&A. And so the FP&A, like I have a weekly meeting with the FP&A team. We have a joke, we call it the party people meeting. It's on Friday morning, because in my mind, like we're talking about the next year, 2 years of the company. Now the finance team doesn't know how to make all those things come true and operate in reality. But when I say, am I better off investing in this or this, like I kind of use them as the intellectual partner to figure that question out. So getting back to your question, here's what I would say, like, do what you need to go do now. Don't impact your passion for your MBA or the broader set of school that you're doing because of one particular thing. The beauty of the world today that I think is different than when I got my MBA is the availability to learn on demand and in real time is infinitely better today. Randeep, sorry, I'm gonna date you. It's infinitely better than like the prior generation when I was growing up. Like if I suddenly today needed to learn a lot about finance and accounting, like I can go sign up for a course online. I can spend a couple weekends doing it and I can figure it out. Whereas in the old days, it's like you had that one chance to take a course when you were at graduate school. And if you missed that opportunity, you didn't have a good way to go learn it again. So I think today your ability to learn the things that you need to learn at the point in time when you need to learn them is very different than what it was 10 years ago. And I would sort of take advantage of that.
Thank you very much. I think you solved my question very well, and I already know the second answer. In terms of your first suggestions, I want to move a little bit further. And so I already know where is my passion at. So I'm very interested in metaverse related industries. So I really want to promote this product. So I plan to work as a product marketing manager in high-tech company. And so now I'm looking for those kind of company, like maybe Meta is very difficult. I'm also trying Roblox, like Epic Game, this kind of company. Also some startups. Do you have any suggestions? So should I join the big company or the startup company? Because I don't care about which role I'm going to work. I just so interested in this area. I listen to the podcast every day, read the articles every day, watch the video every day. I even start to create videos of about metaverse and build my personal branding through YouTube and TikTok. So I just want to do it, whatever role or whatever company, but I still have needed to find a direction. So
yeah,
can you give me some suggestion? Yeah,
I think it comes down. So assuming you can find a job in either spot, which is a very lucky place to be in, I would generally just say smaller companies are going to let you do a wider variety of things and get more broadly well-rounded. Marcy, I see you nodding because Marcy's been in companies that have been bought by really big companies and kind of go back and forth. Whereas I feel like here's the way I'd simplify it. If you're looking for a broader set of wider experiences, smaller companies are going to be a better option. If you're looking for training grounds where you can learn fundamentals that you don't have, bigger companies are going to be bigger or better options. If you don't need a training ground, then great. Like smaller companies are fine. What I find a lot with MBAs, especially people who haven't worked in technology before, is they're trying to find a way in. They feel like they're on the outside and they're trying to knock on the door. They're like, how do I get into the building? And so I think the kind of mid-sized to bigger companies there tend to be better entry points because you can get in with a kind of more of a well-rounded background, but without a deeply specialized background. When you go to smaller companies, they tend to want deeper specialization. So I think a lot of it depends on your personality, what you like, how much structure you want. Like, are you ready for a big crazy mess where you have no idea what you're doing and people don't have any idea what you're doing and you have to figure it out? Are you more a person who likes structure and like, I'm going to do this and they're going to do that and these things will come together, like those types of decisions? And then I think, for those of you who are moving into tech, you haven't been in tech before, I want to save you from beating your head against the wall for a long time. It's hard to find a job, or at least when I was probably my first 5 years post MBA, it's hard for people to get into tech who hadn't been in tech before going to small companies. You tended to go to more mid-sized, well-formed, large companies, got some more training, sort of built your credibility for a couple of years, and then you'd have a wider variety from there.
Thank you so much. I think I already know the answer. I worked for a high-tech company for more than 6 years. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to ask a couple of questions as well. There's a couple of things that if we had a little bit of time, I think everybody might be interested to know. I think I told you, Greg, we have a couple of things we love to ask no matter what kind of person we're talking to, regardless of the industry. So one of those is, to whatever extent you're allowed to share, kind of what is next for Invoca. You and I had a chat. Certainly, I think there's stuff going on around moving from a single product to a multi-product offering. I remember, and I wrote down some notes about that. But I'd really love for you to just talk a little bit more about kind of the exciting things that are ahead for the next couple of years for you guys, or even just next year.
Yeah, sure thing, Amber. So I'd say there are a couple of things. One, you heard Marcy mention, in technology companies, the transition from selling and making one product to two products is a very big change. It doesn't sound like a big change, but it is. It requires people to get out of their comfort zone. You start to have internal conflict in a way that you never have before, because suddenly you have to decide, if I'm going to invest $100 in a marketing campaign, am I investing in a marketing campaign for product A or product B? And so it raises a lot of new challenges. It's a really important transformation because typically companies that go multi-product, they have multiple levers for growth in the future. So it's a really important thing to do. So that's kind of a journey that we started on about a year ago. And that will continue. That takes time. So like, that's really important. I mentioned international before. We'll definitely look to do more internationally. And then I would say the biggest one is we acquired a company in Chicago about 4 or 5 months ago. That's the first time we've ever done an acquisition. And it was substantial. It was, we were about 200 employees. The company we acquired was about 100, 115. So it was not sort of like, did you go find, 5 folks and tuck them into a corner of the company? Like the company grew 50% overnight during COVID, all over Zoom. And so that will continue to be a big area of focus for us. And it's always hard.
A competitive product, a complementary product?
Yeah, it was, yeah, no problem at all. So it was an end category acquisition. It was you're talking to the CEO of the company. We're the number 1 player in the market. We bought the number 2. I have a biased opinion. But no, it was a company that had a ton of people who had built product and understood customers that were looking to scale. So in today's marketplace, and I thought about this not only in financial terms, but in today's talent marketplace, it's really hard to grow your headcount 50% with people that are almost immediately ramped to understand your business. And that was a big function for us. There were some technology elements that were very complementary to what we were doing and additive. There were some go-to-market elements that were very additive. So that's really exciting, but like going and buying a company and standing up and talking about how exciting it is the first day, the first week, the first month, that's the fun part. There's a tremendous amount of hard work that comes in the years afterwards around really deeply integrating and bringing those 2 teams together. And so I would say that continues to be a very big area of focus for us, and something that, I hate to say the job's never done because it will be done one day, but it continually unfolds and sort of opens up things that you need to go do.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't think when we talked, when we had our prep call, I knew about the acquisition. My memory may be failing me. So now I feel like I owe you double the thanks for taking the time to come talk to us, especially while knowing that you're going through all of this. So I think I'll just close out with one more question, and I'll give Randeep a chance to give some closing remarks, unless I see another question in the chat. Another thing we always like to ask, and I did speak to you about this before, is whether or not you guys are still growing and what type of opportunities are currently available at Invoca that may be appropriate for MBAs. I know we had talked a little bit about maybe there being some opportunities for people who are just a little bit further along in their career.
Yeah.
But I'd love for you to talk about where your hiring needs are and where they might apply to the people that are on this call.
Give me 2 seconds here. I'll drop a.
And we'll send it out too.
There you go. I would say in general, so product marketing and product management are both I don't think we have any PM openings right now. I think we have PMM openings. I would say just broadly across technology companies, those are both roles where you need people that have kind of a general good business toolkit. They understand a little bit about sales. They understand marketing. They understand a little bit about engineering. So keep in mind, like, I'm not an engineer. I never taken a computer science class. I taught myself to code a little bit in the late 90s. But I was a product manager without ever having studied CS. I kind of learned logically how to think about products and technology architectures and data structure and things like that. We have some roles in customer success, which is really the role that kind of comes into play after a customer has bought something from you. Cloud software companies, for those of you, I assume many of you know this, but like they're subscription models, right? They're like magazines or newspapers or streaming services or wireless phones these days. And so a huge part of our value proposition, our business falls apart if our customers aren't happy, because if our customers aren't happy, they cancel. And that's really bad for us. It's very expensive for us to our customers. So when they later cancel, that's really bad. So it's rules for success. I would say too, one of my summer internships between my graduate degree and my MBA degree, like I worked in sales for a year, and that was a super interesting experience. And sales is a hard job. And I think I'm going to generalize about myself and all of you for a second. I'm including you and me in my characterization, but like, it's easy to sit in sort of the ivory tower of, a very elite MBA program. Getting out, going, selling stuff to people and like making your living by making that happen and having to push and prod, beg, plead, cajole, like that's hard work, but I think it's really good experience. And I think the most successful salespeople think very strategically. They are able to really understand the business of their customer. Marcy, I don't know if you've, as a buyer have experienced this, but like really good salespeople become almost like advisors that you trust. So I think sales roles are potentially interesting for folks too. But yeah, there are a variety of roles that are open. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line. I'm happy to connect you with the right hiring manager. But I think, again, I go back to finding things that you're passionate about that you want to go do for the next 20 years. That should be the most important thing you're focused on in the next few years, because you're charting a path for yourself for the next 2 decades. And if you go the wrong direction, it's a lot harder to change directions later. And so the number one thing you need to be focused on is like, am I headed in the right direction for a 20 to 30 year investment, which is my career?
Absolutely agreed. And thank you again, Gregg. I think we, as I had hoped we would, we covered a very wide variety of topics. And I hope that everybody, whether you asked a question or even if you were just kind of enjoying listening to everybody else ask and have their questions answered, hopefully you guys learned a lot. And as I mentioned, and I'll let Randy close in a minute, as I mentioned, we will send out kind of like just to recap some of the key points, the job information, Gregg's contact information to those of you that were on the call, as well as anybody else who contacted me separately who said they couldn't make it but would like the information. So again, thank you so much, Gregg. And I will turn it over to Randeep really quick to close this out so we get us all out of here on time.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat. Thanks, Gregg, for joining us here. I think it was really, I learned a lot about AI, about opportunities, even the advice, right? And the fact, on-demand content, one of the things you mentioned, is so much more than today. And even this event would not be possible maybe 15 years back on Google Meet across 8 different states, or people coming from 10 different schools, and you are in your home, in the West Coast. I mean, I think technology has a big part. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks to everyone who joined us as well. We do this monthly. We are planning to have another event, hopefully sometime in Jan, right, Marcy? So we are looking at a potential speaker to come and join us as well. And I think it'd be a great event, hopefully in Jan as well. So again, everyone, have a great holiday period. And we will be back in Jan with our next Q&A event. And we will be posting this video on YouTube probably by Friday for those who couldn't join us. Check it out.